Sophia had always thought of Martin, her father-in-law, as a calm, distant man, someone polite but distant, the kind of person who never revealed too much about himself, and yet tonight, there was something in the way he moved around the house that felt different, almost hesitant, as if he carried a weight he needed to share. And it all started when she decided to tidy the guest bedroom, a small, sunlit space filled with boxes and half-forgotten memories, and she noticed an old photo album on the edge of the desk, its leather cover worn and soft edges frayed with age, and as she lifted it, the room seemed to quiet down, the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock fading until it was just the two of them, standing awkwardly, a little too close for casual conversation, yet separated by years of formality and politeness. And then came the knock, soft but deliberate, on the bedroom door, and Martin appeared, looking slightly uneasy, holding the album as if it were fragile. And he asked her to help him understand the faces in the pictures, people he had known long before she was even born, friends, family, lovers, colleagues, and the air immediately shifted, becoming charged with curiosity and something unspoken, attention neither of them fully acknowledged, and Sophia, surprised at the unusual request, agreed, and they sat on the edge of the bed, the album between them, flipping through the pages together, the photographs whispering stories of laughter, of summers under golden sunlight, of winters by the fireplace, of moments captured that no one could ever truly relive, and as Martin spoke, his voice soft, almost reverent, recounting tales of people she had never met, places she had never seen, a younger version of him appearing in black and white snapshots, strong, confident, but also vulnerable in ways she had never imagined, and Sophia found herself drawn in, not just by the stories but by the man himself, noticing the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes softened when he looked at a particular picture, the faint smile that tugged at the corners of his lips when he recalled a memory that clearly brought him both joy and regret, and for the first time, she saw Martin not as the reserved, polite figure she had always known but as a human being shaped by love, loss, and longing, and she felt a strange, fluttering emotion she couldn't quite name, something between empathy and admiration, tinged with a curiosity that made her pulse quicken, and she caught herself studying his face more closely, noticing the lines of experience etched around his eyes, the silver streaks in his hair, the quiet strength in his posture, and for a brief, suspended moment, the years between them seemed to shrink as though the room itself had pulled them together into an invisible bubble where time slowed, and the conversation became more intimate, more personal, as Martin's stories moved from simple recollections to memories of choices he had made, chances he had taken, loves he had lost, moments of joy and heartbreak interwoven like threads in a tapestry, and Sophia listened with rapt attention, fascinated by the depth of his life, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't expected, a gentle stirring of emotions that made her aware of her own desires, her own quiet longing for connection, the sense of being truly seen and understood by someone who had lived so much and still carried hope in his eyes. And as he spoke, he suddenly paused, flipping to a photograph of a woman she didn't recognize, her face radiant, smiling in a way that made Martin's eyes glimmer, and he whispered almost to himself, "I wonder if she ever knew." And Sophia leaned closer, curious, sensing the unspoken words, the regret hidden behind his gentle tone, and she wanted to ask, to reach out, to bridge the gap of years with her understanding, but she hesitated, unsure how far she could go without crossing a line. And Martin continued, describing the woman, her laughter, the way she moved, how she had touched his life in ways he had never forgotten, and Sophia felt a pang in her chest, a mixture of sadness and longing that mirrored his, and the room felt heavy with history, with moments that could never return, yet alive in their retelling, and she realized that this quiet, unexpected conversation was shifting something inside her, making her see the man she had always respected in a new light, not just as family but as a person with depths and dreams, a heart that had loved and lost and still held tenderness, and when she tried to respond, her voice caught, as if the words were too fragile to speak, and Martin looked at her then, really looked, with eyes that seemed to pierce through her, soft yet penetrating, and he said, almost a whisper, "There's something I've never told anyone, not even your husband." And Sophia's heart skipped, a mix of anticipation, fear, and an inexplicable thrill, and she leaned in slightly, drawn by the honesty in his tone, by the vulnerability in the moment, and the silence stretched, fragile thread connecting them, fragile but real, a quiet acknowledgement that something significant was unfolding, that this night, this conversation was unlike any other, a night where stories, emotions, and unspoken truths floated in the air between them, and she realized she was on the edge of a discovery, not just of Martin's hidden past but of her own capacity to feel, to empathize, to connect in ways she hadn't imagined, and as she looked at him, she wondered what he would say next, what secrets, what confessions, what memories lay ahead, and her pulse quickened, not with fear but with the excitement of knowing that the next words could change the way she saw him forever. And in that dimly lit bedroom, with the photo album open, the clock ticking quietly, and the world outside fading into irrelevance, Sophia felt a moment of intimacy that was not romantic in the conventional sense but deeper, more emotional, a connection that lingered in the space between words, the silent understanding of two souls meeting over memories and truths long held back, and she knew that nothing would be quite the same after tonight, that the stories he was about to reveal would leave a mark on her heart, a warmth she could not explain. And as Martin closed his eyes briefly, took a slow breath and began to speak again, she leaned in, ready to listen, ready to understand, ready to be swept into a night of unspoken truths that would linger in memory long after the conversation ended. Martin's words hung in the room, a fragile thread of honesty that seemed to pull Sophia closer, and she could feel the weight of his emotions pressing gently against her own, a mix of empathy, curiosity, and a strange flutter she couldn't quite name. And as he began to speak again, his voice steady but soft, he told her about a love he had lost decades ago, a woman who had captivated him with her laughter, her warmth, the way she seemed to understand him even in moments he didn't understand himself. And Sophia listened, fascinated by the tenderness and the ache in his words, imagining a younger Martin, hopeful, passionate, vulnerable in ways that his polite, composed exterior had never revealed. And the story unfolded quickly, like chapters of a book she had stumbled upon unexpectedly, detailing stolen afternoons in quiet gardens, letters exchanged in careful handwriting, moments of joy intertwined with the anxiety of impending separation, the inevitability of life moving forward. And with every word, Sophia felt herself drawn deeper into his world, sensing the depth of feelings he had carried quietly all these years, and she noticed the way his hands, resting on the photo album, trembled slightly, not with age but with memory, and how his eyes glistened with a mixture of sorrow and longing, and she reached out almost instinctively, placing her hand lightly on his, a gesture of comfort, of understanding, a silent acknowledgement that she saw him, truly saw him in a way few people ever had. And Martin's gaze shifted to hers, surprised for a moment as if he hadn't expected anyone to respond so openly to his heart, and the room seemed to shrink, the space between them filled with unspoken understanding, a connection born not of words but of shared humanity. And he continued, telling her about the moments that had shaped him, the choices he had made that led him away from that love, the regret he had carried silently, the longing that never quite faded. And Sophia felt a mix of emotions, sadness for what he had lost, admiration for his resilience, and a subtle, against the edge of the album, feeling the tactile presence of history, of memories preserved in paper and ink, of emotions that had been carefully stored for decades. And she realized that what Martin was sharing was not just a story of love lost but a story of life itself, the beauty and fragility of human connection, the delicate dance between longing and acceptance, and she felt privileged to witness it, to be present in a moment so intimate, so sincere, so emotionally charged. And Martin, noticing her engagement, continued, telling her about the small choices, the tiny moments that had defined the trajectory of his life, the evenings spent thinking, the nights spent wondering, the mornings that came too quickly, and the decisions that had shaped him, molded him, left him with wisdom and scars alike. And Sophia absorbed every word, every pause, every sigh, feeling the weight of decades in the space of a single evening. And she understood the courage it took to speak, to reveal vulnerabilities long hidden, to trust someone enough to share a piece of one's soul. And she felt a quiet admiration, a deep respect, a subtle connection that made her heart beat a little faster, a little softer, a little more aware. And as Martin's voice faltered briefly, caught in emotion, Sophia instinctively reached for his hand again, feeling the warmth, the slight tremor, the reassurance of presence. And in that touch, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of trust, of understanding, of the delicate balance of boundaries and intimacy. And she realized that this night, this conversation was extraordinary, not in any dramatic sense but in the quiet, profound way that hearts sometimes meet when life aligns unexpectedly. And Martin, sensing the moment's weight, leaned back slightly, eyes glinting with memory, with feeling, with a vulnerability rarely seen, and he whispered, almost with awe at his own courage. "I've carried this for so long. I didn't think I'd ever tell anyone." And Sophia's chest tightened, her own breath caught, as she realized the depth of what he had shared, the significance of trust, the power of honesty, and she felt the strange thrill of emotional closeness, a warmth that was both comforting and stirring, and she knew that she would remember this night forever, not because of what was said but because of how it was said, not because of any dramatic revelation but because of the raw, human truth of it. And she felt a gentle shift in herself, a recognition that connection, empathy and understanding could create bonds deeper than casual acquaintance, stronger than social ties, and yet tender, delicate, and fleeting if not carefully honored. And as Martin closed the album and set it aside, taking a slow, deep breath, Sophia felt a quiet sense of completion, a sense that a chapter of his life had been shared, that a window into his soul had been opened. And though words could never fully capture the intimacy of the moment, the memory would linger, warm and persistent, a reminder of what it meant to be human, to feel, to empathize, to connect. And she realized that in this unexpected conversation, something in both of them had shifted, a quiet resonance, a soft echo of understanding that would remain long after the room was empty, long after the night had passed, long after the photograph album was returned to its shelf. And as she finally stood, stepping back with a gentle smile, Martin's eyes met hers, a small, knowing glance that said more than words ever could, and she felt a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and a tender, unspoken emotion, a feeling that tonight had changed something in both of them, that the past had been shared, the heart had been exposed, and the quiet intimacy of understanding had left an indelible mark, a memory neither would forget, a bond born not of romance, not of drama, but of truth, of human connection, of the courage to share what was kept hidden. And as she left the room, carrying the weight of emotion and understanding with her, she knew that the story was far from over, that there was still more to be revealed, more lessons to learn, more connections to feel. And as she closed the door behind her, the faint glow of the lamp casting shadows across the floor, she felt the soft thrill of anticipation, knowing that the night had opened something extraordinary, a journey of hearts that had only just begun. Sophia stepped back from the photo album, feeling the weight of Martin's stories settle in her chest like a gentle pressure, a mix of empathy, admiration, and something she could not yet name. And as she watched him, she noticed the way his posture softened, the tension in his shoulders easing ever so slightly, and she realized that their conversation had opened a door, a quiet space where vulnerability and trust could exist without judgment. And Martin gestured toward the window, where the garden outside was bathed in soft moonlight, shadows stretching across the lawn, and he invited her to come closer, to see the place where he had spent so many evenings reflecting, thinking about life, about love, about the paths he had chosen and those he had left behind. And Sophia stepped forward, curiosity and anticipation mingling with the warmth already blossoming in her chest. And as she peered outside, she noticed the old tree, wide and gnarled, branches reaching out like the arms of someone waiting to embrace memories. And Martin spoke softly about the nights he had sat there alone, watching the stars, listening to the wind rustle through the leaves, imagining conversations that never happened. And Sophia felt a shiver of recognition, knowing that he had carried so much quietly, that these silent moments had shaped him, taught him patience, longing, and the delicate art of hope. And as he turned back toward her, she noticed a faint glimmer in his eyes, not sadness, not regret, but the kind of wistful understanding that comes from knowing both joy and loss intimately. And she felt herself drawn to him, not in a reckless way but in a human way, a need to acknowledge the depth of feeling that had been laid bare before her. And she realized that in this room, in this quiet space with the soft glow of the lamp, something extraordinary had occurred. A connection formed not through words alone but through the shared experience of emotion, memory and empathy. And Martin began to speak again, this time about the choices that had led him to this point in life, the moments he had cherished, the moments he had wished he could change. And Sophia listened, her heart tightening and expanding at the same time, aware that she was witnessing the fullness of a human life, with all its beauty and fragility. And she felt a strange, tender warmth, a recognition that what they shared in this moment was rare, something that could not be forced or manufactured, something that existed purely because they were present, open, and willing to see one another as they truly were. And as the night deepened, Martin told her about the quiet joys he had discovered in unexpected places, the satisfaction of small victories, the comfort of routine, the thrill of fleeting moments that made life meaningful. and Sophia found herself nodding, sometimes whispering in response, her empathy intertwining with his stories, her imagination painting the scenes he described, until it felt as though they were walking together through time, through the seasons of his life, through the invisible threads that had shaped him. And she realized that this was more than storytelling. It was a sharing of soul, a gentle unveiling of truth that left her both moved and inspired, and she wondered how life had led her to this unexpected intimacy, how a man she had known formally for years could reveal himself so fully in a single night. And Martin, sensing her engagement, smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of the rare trust being extended, and he spoke of the dreams he had once held, the ambitions that had faded, the hopes that had transformed into wisdom, and Sophia felt her chest swell with emotion, aware that she was not just listening to a story but participating in it, feeling the echoes of choices, of love, of longing. And as he paused, she saw a shadow of hesitation in his eyes, a flicker of vulnerability that made her heart ache with empathy, and she reached out lightly, resting her hand on the edge of the desk, a silent gesture of presence and understanding, and Martin's gaze softened, as if acknowledging the unspoken connection, the subtle bridge formed between two hearts through honesty and attention. And he leaned back slightly, taking a slow breath, and began recounting a memory from a summer afternoon, when the sunlight had poured through the leaves, painting golden patterns on the ground, when laughter had filled the air, and when life had seemed endless, and Sophia could almost hear the voices, feel the warmth of the sun, smell the scent of grass and flowers, and she realized that through his words, through the emotions he shared, she was experiencing a life she had never lived, yet feeling it as vividly as if it were her own. And Martin spoke of fleeting moments, small acts of kindness, smiles exchanged, glances held, promises whispered, and the longing that had never faded. And Sophia felt a gentle ache, a tenderness that settled deep in her chest, a recognition of the quiet beauty of human connection. And she realized that this connection was safe, profound, and transformative, not in a romantic or physical way, but in an emotional, deeply human sense. Reminder that hearts could meet without crossing boundaries, that understanding and empathy could create intimacy as powerful as any romance. And Martin, noticing the effect of his words, smiled faintly, a little wistfully, and said softly, "Some memories shape us even if we can't relive them." And Sophia nodded, understanding perfectly, feeling the weight and truth of his statement, and she wondered how many people truly carried their lives with such reflective care. How many hearts held stories untold, how many emotions remained unshared because of fear or hesitation. And as she looked at him, she felt a profound respect, a quiet admiration, and a tender warmth that lingered in her chest. And Martin, encouraged by her response, continued to tell stories of joy, heartbreak, resilience, and hope, each tale more vivid than the last, painting a full portrait of a life rich in experience. And Sophia followed every word, every pause, every inflection, feeling herself swept along by the rhythm of his voice, the cadence of memory, and the emotion that threaded through each anecdote. And she realized that in witnessing these stories, she was learning not just about him, but about the delicate balance of life itself, about longing and fulfillment, about choices and consequences, about love found and lost, and about the beauty of human resilience. And as the night grew later, the city outside quiet, the moon casting soft silver light into the room, Martin turned toward her, eyes reflecting the memories he had shared, a gentle vulnerability still present, and he said, almost to himself, almost in wonder, "It feels lighter now, having told you." And Sophia's heart warmed, understanding that she had become part of a healing moment, a sharing of trust that allowed him to release some of the weight he had carried for decades. And she felt honored, moved, and aware that this was a rare gift, a moment of connection that would linger in memory, quietly, persistently, like the echo of a melody long after the song has ended. And she realized that life sometimes offered these unexpected windows, brief but transformative, moments where two people could meet emotionally and leave changed. And Martin, sensing the night's quiet power, led her back to the center of the room, sitting together for a few moments of shared silence, not awkward, not tense, but filled with understanding, the kind of unspoken communication that spoke louder than words ever could. And Sophia felt her chest swell with emotion, a soft ache of beauty and tenderness, and she knew that when she left this room, when the night ended, she would carry this feeling with her, a reminder that intimacy could exist in many forms, that trust and empathy could bridge gaps, that hearts could meet across generations and experiences without transgressing boundaries. And Martin finally stood, setting aside the album, turning toward her with a quiet, grateful smile, and he said softly, "Some connections are fleeting, but their memory stays forever." And Sophia smiled back, understanding the truth in those words, feeling the lingering warmth of emotional closeness, a subtle thrill, a gentle ache, a reminder of the night's extraordinary intimacy. And as she finally stepped toward the door, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating their faces, she knew that this night had changed her, had shown her a depth of human connection she had never expected, and that the memory of it, the feeling of trust, empathy, and understanding, would remain with her for a lifetime, a quiet, tender flame of emotion that had been kindled in the soft, safe, heartfelt sharing between two souls. And as she left the room, closing the door gently behind her, she felt a mixture of gratitude, warmth, and lingering longing, not for romance or desire, but for the profound emotional bond that had formed, knowing that some nights, some conversations, and some people leave impressions that cannot be erased, that shape the heart quietly, persistently, beautifully. And she carried that feeling with her into the night, into tomorrow, into life itself, aware that some connections, however delicate, however fleeting, are treasures of the heart, and that in understanding another person's truth, we come closer to understanding our own.